right.
Okay.
So now to taste it with water.
Yes, with a little water. Calmed it down a little bit. Still spicy. A little bit more of that the Santa now. Some of that toffee coming through.
Yeah, sure. It actually, adding the water was nice for me in a way where it took down that spiciness and allows you to focus on more of the, this is probably isn't the right word for it, but when I think of sweet, there's different types of sweets. You've got this almost sort of savory sweet, this sort of tiny bit of saltiness in there, but that toffee that you talked about.
There is, absolutely. That you get that sort of little bit of saltiness on the front corners of your tongue. There is this. I hesitate to go as far as saying meaty, because sometimes you do get this meaty sense in a whiskey, and that's not always a good sign. Sometimes, you know, it is. You can take it at a certain level. Sometimes the meatiness in a whiskey is a sign of bad distillation. But here, I think there's just at the very, very little hint of something chewy, I'd go and say, not even meaty.
Yeah.
So, in an interesting and exciting sort of detour, a little experiment into a different type of sherry cask maturation, other than just the Oloroso sherry we use for the La Santa. Shall we move on to the Finealta? Yeah.
Let me just say one thing. As far as the Sonnalta goes, this was the private edition from 2 years ago.
No, last year.
Oh, that's right. Last year, and the Finealta is this year. The Sonnalta may be a little difficult to find.
Yes.
You still can find it here and there.
It is. I mean, that's just the nature of a limited release, and the nature of the fact we only had so many casks.
Well, what I'll do is I'll try to do some research, find some online retailers that may still have some stock, and I'll post those links up for people who like what we talked about.
Nice.
Give them a chance to try it.
So we're going to move on to the last tasting. Now this is Glenmorangie Finealta. This is the recreation of how we think Glenmorangie would have tasted thank you. Back in about 1900. And I'll give you some here as well.
Cheers, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Now, you know, there have been a few distillers out there who have done these sort of archival bottlings recently, and up until Glenmorangie, everybody's done it by sort of finding some rare and ancient bottle, either through an auction or digging the bottle up from the depths of the Antarctic, and that's fine. It's great that you actually had the juice, supposedly, and taking a sample and trying to recreate based on that sample. I think in some ways what Glenmorangie discovered gave us an even greater chance of actually making a whiskey that tasted like it would have done. And what we found were our old leather-bound business ledgers right back into the 1800s that showed exactly, line by handwritten, floral, sort of curly handwriting, line by line, exactly everything that happened at the distillery, the business records of the distillery. And it showed in 1900, Glenmorangie was still distilled in the tallest stills in Scotland. That's the one thing that's constant. But we were not using American white oak casks because you couldn't really get hold of many American white oak ex-bourbon casks in 1900 or prior to that. So we were using Oloroso sherry casks, and not for extra maturation, for full maturation from day one. The flip side of what we believe in passionately now. The other thing is we were using substantially more peat when we malted our barley than we do today. Glenmorangie today uses next to no peat. We use 1 to 2 parts per million phenols in our barley. Back then it would have been substantially higher, but not at a level you would find on Islay. So we're not talking about an Islay single malt. We're talking about a Highland single malt that was lightly peated. Both those two things, the sherry cask maturation and the peat, totally unfamiliar to Glenmorangie these days. But thankfully these tall copper pot stills, designed originally to be gin stills, same stills. When we nose and taste Glenmorangie Finealta, think about those 3 things I said, and we'll pick out some really key flavour profiles. As we do nose, I just want to tell you one other, and go ahead and nose now. One other thing that we found in our business ledgers were that in 1903, unlike the rest of the industry that was really selling all their single malts to blending houses, we were selling Glenmorangie to the Savoy Hotel in London to be consumed as single malt, not just to go into blends. So the whiskey that we've recreated, if we've done the job correctly, will taste like the whiskey that my great-granddad was cavorting around London drinking in a top hat and velvet smoking jacket in 1903, not knowing at all that the world was about to change massively and 2 world wars were coming his way. I hope he had a good time, is all I have to say. You know? Live life to the full, you know? Whilst you can. So, on the nose, straight away, you can tell it's Glenmorangie. It's got some of that citrus, some of that stone fruit, but immediately, hang on, a little tiny whiff of something else. Yeah, the name Finealta, I haven't shown the bottle yet really. The name Finealta here, the second in the private edition. Finealta means elegant in Scotch Gaelic, and you know, partly to reference the age of elegance, the Belle Epoque, the 1900 to 1910 period, and the sort of dandies that would come into the Savoy Hotel to have consumed this fine whiskey, but also to let you know that whilst there is this little whiff of smoke and the heavy sherry, there is definitely the Glenmorangie elegance there, and that's from these highly refluxed spirits off the tallest stills. Anything else you're picking up particularly?
Well, it's got a much more earthy quality to it. In fact, you know, as you know, I've tasted this before, reviewed it before. I love it. One of the notes that grabbed me off the bat that I didn't expect, soy sauce. Yeah,
there is this bizarrely sort of savoury, almost like a molasses maple syrup soy sauce reduction kind of thing. You know, it's sort of sweet but savoury. We talked about that earlier. It's that what is that fifth flavour character that the Japanese seem to have discovered? That's the soy sauce, umami.
Yeah, sure.
That's a sort of soy sauce character that you get in a lot of Asian food.
That's that lighter soy sauce. Yeah, I know
that's
exactly.
That's definitely in this whiskey.
And if you know, with me, if I concentrate on a particular note, a particular smell, I will gravitate to that. And that's why it's good to have some of your other notes to pull me away from that. Not that it's a bad note. I think it's an incredibly interesting note.
Absolutely.
But it's balanced out really nicely with some of the natural Glenmorangie, you know, sort of.
Seriously. I mean, I still, certainly, if you didn't know this was Glenmorangie and you came to this whiskey blind, I think you'd be more likely to pick up some of the citrusy notes because they would be a surprise to you. But when you're doing a lineup of Glenmorangie,
it would stand out.
The other things stand out.
Sure.
You know. So shall we taste?
I'm dying to taste.
Let's have a taste. Cheers.
Cheers.
Wow. 46% alcohol, non-chill filtered, rich, mouth coating, mouthfeel, long finish, some spiciness, that sense of the sort of umami, soy sauce, but I think maple syrup almost in there as well.
But the peat comes out as well too.
You do get it.
It's you know, if you were to take some of the flavors and put them on a spectrogram that went from bottom to top, you've got this low-lying peat that just carries throughout.
But I think it's a very different peaty smokiness to an Islay whiskey. To my mind, you don't get the peatiness. I think you get a smokiness, almost like a wood smoke, and very specifically, it's all reminiscent to me of some dry bits of some gnarly driftwood that you've put together as a bonfire on the beach. That sort of distant, and half a mile away down the beach, it's sort of wafting towards you. There's an ozony, fresh, earthy, sort of like a fresh breeze note coming towards you, and it's just sort of interspersed with this sort of wood smoke note.
Growing up on the Connecticut shoreline, and anybody who lives around the ocean, if you're familiar with a beach bonfire, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I mean, it's just very reminiscent. I went to university at St Andrews up in Scotland, and although we weren't really allowed to light bonfires on the beach, plenty of student parties happened on the beach, and there were bonfires, and it just kind of, that's one of the joys of drinking single malts. All these aromas and flavours bring you flavours and aromas that you haven't smelt for 10-15 years, and they come back to you and they bring memories back, and thoughts of people and friends that you haven't seen in a long time. It's all there.
No doubt.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's
Thank God for single malt.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've nosed a single malt, and you'll gravitate, you grab onto this scent, and all of a sudden, you're back to camping with your father, or you're springtime, at a pond fishing. Just these.
There were a couple of distilleries, competitor distilleries, just north of Glenmorangie, and one in particular, which I won't mention because I don't want to lose my job. Always has a sort of this lovely sense of like lanolin, like a sort of lamb's wool, or like a wool sweater, damp wool sweater. It sounds disgusting, but this sense of a sort of slightly smoky, damp wool sweater, and it always brings me back to when I was about 8 years old. Digging my father's vegetable garden with him, and in the fall, and the smell of his bonfire in the corner, and his ratty old gardening wool sweater with holes in it that got a bit damp, and you can't put a price on that sort of memory being sparked with such a visual memory as well in your mind. It's fantastic.
I couldn't agree more. Sometimes I pick up notes of baby vomit, written this down. It sounds
father of two.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds disgusting, but I've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. They'll be 3 and 5 soon, and I've got these memories. If you're a young father like myself, or a grandfather who has a grandkid, and they spit up on you. Yes, it's disgusting, but there's a sweetness to it. Not a sweetness that they threw up all over you, but that
I know.
It's just sort of brings back a memory that's pleasant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You strange man.
Well, I really appreciate you taking me through the line.
Of course, absolutely.
Hopefully we can get together again. Yeah. Earlier in the week I talked about the fact that we would get into tasting some Ardbegs. Unfortunately, we're running out of time in this particular session, but I'm sure we'll get together again.
We'll find a time to do the Ardbegs soon.
And